I thought I'd start with a general flow of the process here, right? So you see those are the 7 or so steps here. Basically, you start with creating an order, right? So it's a standard functionality. You create sales order, purchase order, or a transfer order. Then you need to add the lines from that order to a load, right? And we'll talk about different ways we can create a load. Once the load is created, you basically read and route it. That assigns a route to that load. It defines the sequence of stops, and then you can assign a rate, basically expected charge that you expect to be get charged by the carrier, right? So you have to have certain internal rating mechanisms to define this is what we expect to pay a carrier for that load, right? So that will be a third step right here. Once you do that, of course, you basically wait for that load to be picked up and shipped. When that happens, you would confirm the load inside the system. So it's kind of a step that does multiple things for us on the background, very important one. It basically generates those expected charges, and then it assigns any miscellaneous charges to an order, and I'll show it to you in more details. Then you basically wait for that carrier invoice to show up. You basically wait for the carrier to send you that invoice either electronically or by mail, whatever the case is. You will then generate a carrier invoice inside the system. So now, once you have it, that's when the reconciliation process would kick in. That's a match invoice to a bill. So basically what that step does, it's say, all right, this is what my carrier is charging me for that shipping, and this is what I expected to pay based on the rate that I calculated during the previous step. And the system will say, can that invoice be approved? So that process is very similar to, I would say, three-way matching on the purchase order side, where you have ability to say, this is my PO price and here's my invoice price. Are they matching? Okay, they are. And this is the received quantity and this is the invoice quantity. Are they matching? Yes or no, right? So very similar to the three-way, two-way matching on the purchase order side. This is your reconciliation of here's my carrier invoice price versus the expected price for that shipping, and see if they can be matched and approved. And only once you have done that matching and successfully approved that carrier invoice, only at that point you will see a vendor invoice journals. Only at that point you will see an actual payables generated for that carrier vendor, right? So this is a general flow. I kind of briefly went through it, but I will come back to it every time we're going to go through a step. So with that being said, let me just move it out and let me just open a system here that I have prepared here. So let me log into the demo system. So this is a typical Contoso demo system that we have here. What I'll do here is let's start with a simple example of creating a purchase order and adding it to a load, right? So very kind of basic steps here. Go to the list of all the purchase orders. Let's quickly create a purchase order. I think I will use that vendor US-801. All right. I'll also ship it out from warehouse 24. That's correct. Okay. Now, I would like to show you a few things here. So this is my PO. Let me just finish creating it first. So do that. All right, and I'll add 2 items. I'll add 2 different items, and I'll just explain what those are. So the first one is A001. And let's say the quantity will be 1, that's fine, And the second one will be D001. Just to come back here. Add the line again. D0001. And the quantity here will be, let's say 1 is here and 2 is here. All right, so what are those items? These items are, this first item is WMS item. That means it was set up with a storage dimension group that makes it usable on those handheld devices. Sorry, that's the A001 is the one that, that's the one that is WMS controlled, right? So it is set up to a storage group. It's WMS controlled. You can use it. You can complete operations on it using handheld devices. The D0011 on the other side is non-WMS controlled, so it's a simple warehousing item. But in order for me to be able to work with that item in the transportation module, I had to make sure that I check the transportation management checkbox on it. So this is my release product, and you can see there's a transportation tab all the way on the bottom here. It says use transportation management processes. So I had to check it yes, had to set it to yes, even though the item itself, as I have said, is assigned to a simple storage dimension group that has only site and warehouse defined, right? So this is a requirement. The items that you want to work with in transportation management modules don't have to be advanced WMS items. They can be either, but you have to make sure that the item itself has the transportation checkbox checked here, right? So that's what we will enable it. The other thing that I have to mention here is in order for you to work with TMS, the warehouse on the line, on the order, has to be advanced warehouse. So you see in this case, I have warehouse 24, and then this is a Contoso demo data for people that work with it, kind of know that this is a advanced warehouse. So the warehouse has to be advanced warehouse. The item does not have to be, right? So this is kind of an important point that I would like to highlight here. Another thing that we need to have in place, and that happened automatically because I defaulted it, is the terms of delivery that is assigned to that order. So I went to the PO header and I'm looking at the delivered terms here. And if I right click, go to view details, this add transportation charges to orders checkbox has to be on if we want to match expected charges to actual charges on the invoice. Right. So sometimes if you forget to default that delivery term, you will see that it will not generate expected charges, and therefore the reconciliation process will be, I think, less meaningful. You can still create load and you can post an invoice, but you will lose that reconciliation piece saying this is what I expected to pay versus what the customer versus what the shipping carrier is actually charging me. Right. So as you see here is that I have a mode terms of delivery assigned to that order. It has been defaulted from the vendor account, but I can change it here. As long as the order has that delivery terms with that checkbox checked, you should be good. And the last thing before we move on is I would like to show you the mode of delivery here. So this is this mode of delivery that is auto-generated based on the shipping carrier and the carrier service, right? So I think Microsoft has changed the way those modes of delivery are created. Before they were just kind of set up straight in the modes of delivery form, right, like this, right? So you will just go here, see all the modes of delivery, click on new, etc. But then with introduction of TMS module, we also see those modes of delivery that are auto-generated that basically have this dash in between. So you can see right here, I see parcel and then STD. So I kind of know that the parcel carrier is a shipping carrier and STD, which stands for standard, I guess, is a carrier service. So the system will combine a shipping carrier together with its service to generate a mode of delivery that can be used, right? And you can see here, I kind of wanted to show you an example of saying, this is a vendor pickup. So that means even though it's a PO, the vendor will not ship it to us. And therefore we have to schedule a load to arrange a carrier to go to the vendor location, pick it up and bring it to our warehouse. How do I know that? Well, I kind of assigned that placeholder mode of delivery that says vendor pickup. So this is a signal for me as a transportation logistics planner to say, all right, I know that this is a PO that will not get delivered by the vendor. It's our responsibility to arrange the carrier, right? And you can see right now that it has the shipping carrier and pickup a carrier service automatically populated. It's basically, let me just show you how it works, right? So if you select, for example, to that mode of delivery that says point STD, you'll see that the shipping carrier and carrier service will get automatically updated, right? So by changing mode of delivery, we automatically change the shipping carrier and carrier service. It only happens for those ones that have been set up using the carrier's form, right? Not the standard mode of delivery. So let's keep it like this. So we have a mode of delivery says vendor pickup. So it's a signal for me. I know that this PO needs to be picked up by our organization, right? So now we need to understand what we're going to do now. We need to create a load, right? Remember, let's just revisit our diagram here. So we created an order. The next step will be create a load, right? The second step. So in order to do that, we need to create a load, and the load can be created automatically or manually. How do we control that? Well, we need to navigate to transportation management parameters and open the transportation right here, right? And then scroll all the way down and see the loads. And you can see right now, automatically create a sales order entry automatically create a load for the sales order. It's set to no. That means for the sales orders, we have to manually create the loads. Then we look at the purchase orders, which is that second checkbox. It's set to no too. So I kind of know that the system will not generate a load for a purchase order automatically. But then I see, for example, for the transfer order, it will, right? So this is how you control the behavior of whether or not the load will be generated by the system. And the way the system does it, it generates one load per order. So if you have one PO with multiple lines, it will generate a single load for you automatically and add all the lines to it. In our case, because this checkbox is cleared, the system did not generate a load for me. How do I confirm that? Well, you notice under line details, you have this loads tab right here, all the way on the bottom right corner. When you click on it, you see that grid is empty. So that tells me right away that the system did not generate a load. If there was a load, you would see it right up in that section. All right. So now let's move on to the second step, create a load, right? So how do you do that? There is something that is called load planning workbench. It's part of the transportation management module. It's kind of right here, all the way on the top left corner, load planning workbench. So you're going to hear me say talk about a lot of workbenches and the engines here, right? But in order for us to generate the load, we need to go to that load planning workbench. Let's do that. Once it loads, in the top section, we see all the different orders that we can add. We can see sales orders that can be added to a load. We can see transfer order lines that can be added to a load. And we can also see purchase order lines that can be added to a load. So this is the grid that we have here. It shows you all the PO lines that are open and that have a ship date on or before September 30th, which is today's date. So our purchase order number is 676, right? So go right here, 676, and I see two lines, right? A001, 2 pieces, and D001, 1 piece. So I'm going to select these two PO lines, and I will add them to a new load. In the top right, just click on the supply and demand, and then click add to a new load. When you add it to a new load, you need to select a load template. It's going to be this. What does it do? Just to show you, right-click view details. It just defines the maximum weights and the maximum volumes that can be added to a load. So that basically represents some sort of physical dimensions of the trailer or a container that this load will go into, right? So I selected a load template. I confirm those are my two PO lines I would like to add to that load. So that looks correct. And now I'm just going to click on OK. So with that, I have created a new load. It's visible right here. I can click on it, and that's my brand new load that I just have created. Also, if I come back to the PO, refresh the screen, you'll see that now I have a reference to the same load 337 that is now specified on both of my PO lines. So that kind of completes this second step of creating a load. Now we're going to move on to the rate and route load, right? So that's kind of where the few things, important things will happen. So what does rate and route means? So that means you will create a route, and the route basically represents a sequence of stops. So in our case, it's one order on the load. Therefore, the sequence of stops will be go to vendor address. So that's your first stop, and then drop it off to my warehouse 24 address, which is a second stop. That's basically in a nutshell what the route is. And then we can assign an expected rate, an expected shipping rate, an expected any accessorial rates, any fuel surcharges that will be associated with that route. So it's kind of 2 in 1, rate, route. Create a route first, which will define the sequence of steps, and then assign a rate to it. So here's my load. First of all, let's take a look if I have any routes. Click on the routes right here, and because we haven't rate routed yet, we see that that screen is blank. There are no routes created for that load. Let's go back, and we need to create a new route. You create a new route using RAID route workbench. Remember I said a lot of workbenches and engines? So I created a new load using load planning workbench. Now I will RAID and route that load using RAID route workbench. All right, click on it right here. And that's where in the header you see basically all the details from that load. So we see the pickup address. Here's my perfect coding solution. My vendor, it has an address in, I don't know where that is, like Massachusetts, I guess, right? So it has a zip code right here, it's UMC. And then my to address is my warehouse 24 address somewhere in Washington. Here I see details, the total weight, the volume, the value, LTL classes, basically all the information that was pulled in from the orders to that load. And here I see my pickup, I see my shipping carrier and my carrier service. Remember, those are placeholders. So this way I know, correct, I need to schedule a carrier for it because the shipping carrier is the pickup. So I know that I need to schedule a carrier for it. So I need to remove that placeholder, shipping carrier, and carrier service. And then I need to let system know, give me all the rates that you can find. Show me all the applicable carriers that can deliver on that load. And with that, I need to click on rate shop button right here. What the system does, it says it goes through the list of all the carriers and then decide which ones of those carriers are eligible to serve that destination. So you may have a carrier that doesn't serve that destination. For example, they don't go to Massachusetts, or they don't go to Washington, or they don't carry LTL class 100. So you may have multiple exceptions that will limit that carrier from being eligible to deliver that load. In this case, we see that this list right here shows me all the carriers that are available here. But this list doesn't hide the exception carriers. It basically shows me all the carriers. But now if I would like to filter it to show only the carriers that have a valid rate for that destination on the route, I need to click on this hide exceptions checkbox. When you do that, that's when the system say, all right, out of all the 12 carriers that are set up in the system, actually only 2 are eligible to serve that destination and only 2 have a rate that is calculated internally. So you can see that I have a shipping carrier LTL and the total rate here is $160. And then I have a shipping carrier truck carrier, again, very generic, right? Not branded. And the total rate, expected rate is 747. So 160 for LTL, 747 for truckload. Now, how these rates are calculated, it's a matter of a separate session, right? But the important point here is that these rates were calculated internally. The system didn't go out and connect it to any third-party service, any shipping engines, and pull those rates in. No, it can be built, and you can build it either via integration, EDI, or any other integration that you can create. But out of box, those rates were calculated on internal rules that were defined for each carrier. So you, as the organization, are responsible for maintaining those rates to make sure they're correctly calculated, right? So we have to rely on the internal tables to calculate these rates for us, right? So that's an important point. How these calculations are based, as I said, it's definitely a topic for a separate session, but the system looks at the number of miles between the points. It looks at the total weight. For LTL shipments, the class, LTL class is important. Zone to which that address belongs to is also important. So there are different ways to rate that load, to create a rate for that load. And they are dependent on the specifics of how these rules are done. But in generally speaking, it looks at the address, number of miles, LTL class, weight, zones, etc., etc. So depending on the carrier, the way this rate is calculated will be different, right? So let's say I now want to rate and route it, and now I have selected the LTL carrier here. So what I'll do next is I assign that carrier to my load. And what the system will do and in order for me to do that, I'll select that carrier, LTL, $160 expected charge. That makes sense. And I'm going to click on assign. What happens here, it's not very clear, but I'll explain here. The system creates a route, and that's why it shows it to us. Remember before we went to that screen and it was blank? Well, because there was not that route. Now, when I assigned a carrier to a load, the system automatically generated that route for me right here. And I can see in the header of this route, I see the rate, $160. I see transit days, 5 days. It expects to transfer it from Massachusetts to Washington. And here I see my segments. And remember, it's a single order PO, single order load. Therefore, there is only one segment. It basically says, if we click on the segment details, go to perfect coding and deliver it to warehouse 24. If you had multiple stops, then you would see multiple segments right here. But this is a very simple scenario right here. All right, so now I have a route. It has a rate. If I would like to understand how that $160 were calculated, click on route rate details. Great. Click on that, and that's where they say, oh, system calculated 2 rates for us. The first one was just a shipping rate. It was for a $60, and there was some sort of accessorial LTL charge of $100. So that's why the total rate was $160, because of those 2 charges. So it's important to understand that this rate is not just a single line. It's a calculation. It's basically a sum of different rates. And these rates may be for accessorial, fuel surcharges, or maybe the freight itself. So in this case, the freight itself was $60. And then there is a surcharge, some sort of accessorial surcharge of $100. Therefore, we expect to pay $160. Great. Also, what happens here, let me close this. This is my route. Close this, go back to the right route workbench, and now finally close this to go back all the way to the load. Another thing that I'll say here is, here's my estimated time of arrival, October 5th, right? That's based on the 5 transit days that the system pulled up from the transit engine. That's how the system knows that between this zip code and that zip code, there are 5 days transit. And that's why the ETA got populated right here. But no dates are being updated on the PO itself. I think that's something that people kind of expect. Oh, is it gonna then update my PO dates? It will not, right? So remember, it was saying delivery on 9/30. Even if I refresh that date, so refresh that form, it's still gonna show 9/30. There is no delivery date here, and then delivery on the PO line would still remain 9/30. So it still thinks that it can be delivered today, even though it basically says, well, it's probably gonna be delivered in 5 days. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Right, no integration, no pulling dates from the load back to the order, purchase order, sales order, or a transfer order, right? They only would remain in the load form right here. All right, so now let's come back to our screen right here. So we have rate route that load, and now we need to confirm that load. So let's do that. This is my load form right here. I will click on the ship and receive, and then click on confirm inbound shipment. That's basically what I call an inbound load confirmation. So that has happened, and 2 things had happened here on the background that are, again, not very clear. Number 1, it generated something that is called freight bills. Let's click on that. Here I see 2 freight bills. One will be for $60, that's my shipping, and one will be for $100, that's my accessorial charge. The freight bills represent expected charge. Those are the accruals, you can call them. They're not going to ledger accounts, they're not posted to ledger accounts, but they're sitting here waiting to be matched to carrier invoice itself. So those are things that will match to carrier invoice to understand if that carrier invoice makes sense. Basically, we think that we should pay $160, but the invoice amount may be different. So when we're going to match the invoice to the freight bills in the later stage, we will see if there are any differences that needs to be authorized. But the purpose of the freight bill is to capture that expected charge until the carrier invoice actually shows up, so it can be then used for the reconciliation. So we had 2 lines, two bills, one for each charge type: $60 freight, $100 accessorial. Another thing that had happened here, which is not also very clear, is the system added a miscellaneous charge to the purchase orders. So here's my PO. Let me click on financials and let me click on maintain charges. So now I see $30 here, and $50 here. That's for the first PO line. So the total is what? $80, 30 for accessorial and 30 for freight and 50 for accessorial. This is for my first PO line, $80. And then the second line, click on it, financials, view charges, maintain charges, same thing. So 30, 50. Well, the question is, how did system allocate? Because in total, that's $160. That's the charge that needed to be allocated to these order lines. But why exactly did it split it evenly? Why those $60 went 30-30 and why that $100 went 50-50? That's when we need to understand how the apportionment engine actually works, right? What does the apportionment engine actually does? It decides how to allocate charges to the lines of the order. So that's under transportation management module, generic engines. And here I see my apportionment engine that is used. That's basically some sort of library, some sort of logic that is built by Microsoft. If you have developers, you can definitely develop your own apportionment engines, as with any other rating engines as well. But then I click on the parameters and I see that it apportions it based on the weight. So it decides I have $60 of the freight to allocate to two lines. How do I do that? Is it based on the quantity? Is it based on the weight? Is it based on the volume? Is it based on the value? In this case, this apportionment engine allocates based on weight. And in order for us to confirm that, remember, it's evenly allocated, but the quantity here is different, right? So you can see that for my first line, I have 2 units, right? So let's just check what those 2 units weight. We're going to click on the item number itself and go to inventory. And we can see that the gross weight here is actually 3 pounds, right? Or 3 kilos. I don't know what the system weight here. So that means because I have 2 units, the total weight is 6 pounds for this, because 1 is 2 plus, times 2, right? So I have 6 pounds total weight for this line. And for the second line, let's do the same thing and click on inventory. And we can see that that 1 unit is actually 6 pounds. So even though the quantities are different, the first unit weight is only 3 pounds, but times 2, it gives us the total weight 6. And the second unit weighed 6 pounds on its own, a single unit, therefore the total weight is also 6 pounds. Therefore, the weight of those 2 lines is identical, and the apportionment engine allocates it based on weight. That's why it allocated this charges 160 evenly across those 2 lines, right? But if the weight would have been different, it would have allocated it slightly differently. So those are the 2 things that actually had happened during our shipment confirmation. It generated freight bills, and it also assigned those charges to the PO lines. So those are important to remember. When you do that, how does system know, for example, which ones of those charges to use? Well, the last thing I'll show you on this front will be the miscellaneous charges right here, which I know a lot of setups, but that just maybe helps you to understand here. So in this case, if we go back to our order and go to financials, maintain charges, we see the charge code that was used called vendor freight. Why did the system use vendor freight? Because of miscellaneous charge setups right here. We basically say if the module is vendor, which means purchase orders, use this vendor freight charge. But for example, for the sales order, the system will add a different charge code that may have different debit and credit accounts. And for inventory, which applies to our transfer orders, it's going to use this charge instead, right? So that's how the system knows which of those charge codes to use based on the setup in this form right here. All right. Now we move on to this create freight invoice step. So let's go back to our load. And now I will open my freight bill details. Remember, those my expected charges, $160. And the easiest way to manually generate an invoice is click on generate freight bill invoice right here. I will have to specify invoice number. Let's say it's 109 and click on OK. So of course I could have received that carrier invoice electronically, right, via EDI. Or I could have created manually from scratch, which would take more time for me, or I could just basically say, just copy it from the freight bills. So you can see that the total right now, this is my freight invoice. The total here is actually $160, right? You can scroll right here, $60 and $100. So This is the simplest way. It's very similar to how the vendor invoices are generated. You open a PO and say generate an invoice. It just kind of say, all right, I'm just going to copy everything for the purchase order and say that's your invoice, and then you modify as needed. And this is exactly what I'll do. I will create a discrepancy here. So I want to create a discrepancy that will cause some reconciliation issues. So I expected to pay $60 for freight, and let's say I will pay $61, or the vendor is charging me $61. And then I expected to pay $100 accessorial charge, but let's say now it will be $150. So you see the first difference is quite small. It's only $1. The second difference is significant. It's over 50% over, right? So here's my invoice. I said, this is what carrier is charging me. I don't know why, I don't care, right? I basically say, this is what I see on the carrier invoice. This is what I received. Now I'll mark that invoice as ready for matching. So there's a checkbox here on the header that say this invoice is done. It's no longer draft. It's verified. It's what the carrier has sent to us. Now let's see how it's going to stand when we're going to try to match it and see if we can approve it out of box. So we're going to mark that invoice as ready for, I don't know if you can see it, it says ready for auto matching. We're basically saying this invoice is ready for auto matching. And now we initiate that auto matching routine, right? It can be set up as the batch job, as with everything in Dynamics, but in this case, I will manually generate it. So there's an auto match batch, very interesting name here, but it basically say, does that invoice matches to our freight bills? Remember, freight bills capture estimated charge, invoice is actual charge. Now we need to see if it can be approved. So we're going to let the system to decide whether or not it can match it. So it's going to click on OK, and that's where the system will use certain rules to go through the list of all the freight bills and try to match it to carrier invoice. Of course, it's going to use the load ID and different rules. Again, separate session just to understand how that works. But basically, I expect the system to see if it can match it to any of my invoices here. And you can see right now, my status, my invoice, this is my invoice, the status has changed to pending review. So it definitely say that I cannot process as is. All right, so I know there's a pending review, so I need to review something and make some decisions. I take a look at the first line, and the first line status ready to process. That means system is happy with that first line. What was that first line? Well, we scroll down, we see that the price was $61 and our expected charge was 60. So we're $1 off, but the system knows that this is acceptable tolerance. Right, there is a separate setup that defines acceptable tolerances. I can talk about this more if I have some time, but basically systems say that $1 is acceptable tolerance because the tolerance is set up, I think, at 5%. So it would take anything, or at 10%, right? So it would take anything up to $66. So the first line, it's ready to process. The second line, though, right? Remember, $100 versus $150, that's a 50% overage, and that's definitely over 10% that we have allowed. That's the reason why the entire invoice is set to be reviewed. So we basically need to decide what to do with that difference of $50 right here. System can take care of the difference of $1 for the first line, but doesn't know what to do with the difference of $50 for the second line. So this is for us to review. This is open freight invoice. I'm a user. Now I need to decide I would like to process it. So I'm going to click on submit for approval. And that's when the system will pop up a screen saying, all right, you need to tell me what to do with that $50 difference. I don't know, right? Do you want to pay it? You don't want to pay it? You basically decide, you're a user, you know what to do. So I'm going to click on reconciliation reason codes. And those are the ones that will decide how that difference will be dealt with. And you can see there's a one called approved, and you can see it says the pay the freight vendor check. That means if we select approved, we will pay that $50 to the carrier. If we select damage claim, for example, the pay freight carrier is unchecked. So we know that this will not get paid. It's really for us to define those reconciliation reasons, let different credit and debit accounts, check boxes on the pay the carrier or not, and then select the appropriate code to deal with the discrepancy that was over a specific percentage. So here are those standard codes and say I'm going to approve it. That means this $50 will be paid. So the vendor will get paid $150, plus it's going to get paid $61, right? So I think in total it will be $211 that this vendor will get paid. There is also a comment here, so comment here, right? You can specify it, and then you can click on OK. When you do that, only at this point, so let me just come back to my diagram right here. We just completed this step right here, match invoices to the bills. We did it automatically using that auto match batch job, and we have approved that freight invoice. Because we completed that last step, only at that step, we now have a carrier vendor invoice. So we can come back here. Let's go back to our load. This is our load. I will refresh the screen. That vendor invoice journal button slides up. That's basically a final step. I have finally generated AP journal, a vendor journal. I click on journal details. Here it is. And let's just click on the line just to see what had happened here. So I see $61, the first line, and I see $150, this line right here. So those two lines combined basically define what will get paid to the vendor, $211. And I also see these allocations. Here's my overage of $1 that is allocated evenly based on weight to two of my lines. And here's my basically main account, the item group, all those dimensions were actually pulled from the PO line. And then I see that the charge itself right here, $30 is evenly allocated. That's based on that miscellaneous charge that we saw. And then we see the overage here, right here, 25 and 25, that $50 overage was allocated to two lines as well. And then $50 that is split evenly, $100 that is split evenly between those two lines. So going through that journal, it can be an exercise on its own, but I just kind of wanted to show you, give you a sense of what it does. Let me just do that. So this is basically what the system generates for us. It pulls a lot of dimensions, so you can basically know your shipping carrier charges based on the product family, so you can maybe analyze it from the trial balance perspective, because it just specifies and copies all the dimensions from the order to the vendor invoice itself. And because we have selected approved vendor, we have approved that difference. We know that we're paying $211, so the entire invoice amount was actually paid to that vendor. All right, guys, so we have 20 minutes left or so, and I would like to move on to the second scenario that, again, and I'll open the floor to any questions that you may have. The second scenario will involve a transfer order and manual rating. So what I'll do here, navigate to inventory management, go to the transfer order, and I'll create a brand new transfer order for me, right? So let me just do this, let the system think. This. Okay, no, so let me just open my inventory management, transfer orders. Create a new one, and then select warehouse 24 from and warehouse 11 to warehouse. Only remember I said all the warehouses have to be WMS. In this case, when you have two warehouses on the transfer order, only the from warehouse has to be WMS controlled. 24 is advanced warehouse, 11 is not advanced warehouse, but we can still make that scenario work, right? So just remember, only for the transfer orders, from warehouse has to be advanced warehouse. The to warehouse does not have to be. I'll add this line, the same item, D001. Let's say quantity will be 3. And what I'll also do here is, because I cannot default terms of delivery, because those cannot be defaulted from the warehouse, I need to manually select that delivery terms, remember FOB with that checkbox checked, to make sure that I'll generate those expected charges when we're gonna confirm that load for that transfer order. So now I'm gonna save. And the first thing I want to understand, do I have a load for me created automatically? Remember the checkbox was checked, so I kind of expect the system to do that for me. How can I check this? Click on the ship tab right here and click on load details. When I do that, I see the system automatically generate a load for me. I did not have to create it myself. So great, right? So there is a saving. It generated a one load per transfer order, and this is what I'm looking at here, right here. All right, so we now have a load. And now when I go to my rate route workbench, remember that was the next step, right? You click on the rate shop, and then you see, oh, there are no carriers that have no exceptions. That means every carrier has an exception. For some reason, it was not set up to come up with a rate, right? they may still be eligible, but the system doesn't know that. According to the system, none of the carriers are eligible. So I have to basically manually select one of those carriers. So I'm going to uncheck hide exceptions. That will show me all the carriers. I will then select, I think I will select this truck carrier right here. And I basically say, I know that this carrier doesn't have any rates, but I would like to assign it to that load and create a route for it. So click on assign. Remember previously, same thing right here. It generates a route, but we see the rate here is 0 because the system say, I mean, that carrier, I don't have any rates that I can calculate for you. And when we click on rate route details, we'll see it basically says error and it says rate is 0. So the system generated rate is 0. But we still assign that carrier and we can still manually assign a rate to it. And that's what I wanted to show you here. I will assign a rate, let's say for $50 here. That's $100 for the rate. And then I'll click on another one, accessorial. I think there's a truckload accessorial, $50 right here. Okay. So now I have manually defined a rate for that route. Close this form, refresh it, and now I see there is a rate of $50. So this is what I wanted to show you here, guys, is that even though if you don't want to bother setting up all the rates inside the system, you can still manually rate that load, but that assumes that you have to obtain that rates elsewhere. You may need to log into the system, carrier system, get a rate from them, and then just plug it into the system the way I just did, right? So it's still possible for you to do the reconciliation process, even though the system did not calculate the rate for you, because you can manually get that rate elsewhere and then just plug it in and set it up in kind of enter it in the system. So now I have an expected rate of $50. Remember, $100 freight, $50 some sort of accessorial charge. Now I can close this, go back to my load. And the next step, as you may recall, is to confirm my load. This is what I'll do. Click on outbound shipment. There's an interesting thing that will happen. So first of all, two things will happen as they were before with a purchase order. I have my freight bill details. Those are my expected charges, $100 freight. The second one is $50 accessorial. Great. I also had this, let me go back to the transfer order. I also had the charges added. So here's my charge, right? And you can see the charge code is freight TR. Remember that it was a miscellaneous charge, right? So different charge codes depending on the order type. For the transfer orders, we use this freight TR charge. That's number 2. But at the same time, what the system actually did, when I confirmed my load, if you look at this right now, you see the status of that TO was created. But when I refresh it, you'll see the status has changed to shipped. So the system automatically, when I confirm my load, it actually shipped my transfer order. It did not happen on the PO side because the PO remained open. I have processed invoice, but my PO is still to be received. It will not happen on the sales order side because I can post an invoice and confirm my shipment, but I still need to separately post the packing slip for that sales order. But for the transfer order, for whatever reason, and I'm still not 100% sure, the system say, all right, you confirm that shipment, you confirm that load, I will automatically ship that transfer order. So the only thing that would be remaining then is to receive it in my receiving warehouse. So this is something to keep in mind, and that can generate, in my experience, some issues, especially when these load confirmations happen via EDI, because the system needs to also trigger that part of the code to actually post that shipment. And if there are some certain dimensions are missing in that transfer order, that will generate some errors. So I just wanted to highlight that to you, right? So let's go back to my load, right? So where we are with my flow here, we confirmed the load. Now the next step is to generate carrier invoice. The process is quite similar. So select my freight bills. Let's do the shortcut, generate freight bills based on those. My invoice will be 110. Make sure you use the different numbers because the system will not accept invoice number duplicates, which makes sense, of course. Here's my freight invoice. Now I'll make some differences, but I will make them quite small, right? So let's say I have $5 extra charge on the first line, and maybe $1 extra on the second line. So now I'm trying to stay within the tolerance. I'm basically saying it's not exactly matching, but it's pretty close type of thing, right? So this is something that will result in a different outcome here. I'll mark that invoice as ready for matching. That means I'm done editing it. It's all good to go. Now the system can take it over. Of course, I can manually match my invoice to my freight bills. There is this match freight bills to invoices button. That's a manual process by looking at the line right here, scrolling through the list of my open freight bills and selecting this and click on match. But that's a manual process, right? I don't want, again, it's still an option. So if you don't want to rely on that auto match process for you to do the matching before that invoice can be processed, you can do this manual matching. Another thing is, what if I forgot to do the match? Let's say, like, you know, I'm kind of, let me just do it, right? Click on submit for approval. Right away, the system say, oh, you have a difference that equals to the total amount of the invoice. The first one you need to operate is the freight, 1 of 5. Because you have not matched it to any bills, that means the entire amount is basically a discrepancy. That's why you need to approve that one. And then because you have not matched the second line of that invoice to any freight bills, the entire amount of $51 is also a discrepancy. So you have to give me an approval for that. So if you forgot to do the match, you basically have to do kind of approve the entire amount as if it was a difference, right? But we were not going to do that. I'm going to cancel out of it. And I would rely on, again, Automatch badge for me to do this. So I will go to my batch job here, Automatch badge. I will run it manually without a batch job, but as I said, you can set it up as a periodic job, so it runs every hour or so. Now come back to my invoice. The workflow status is blank still, but let me refresh that. And look at that, it says ready to process. Before it was review pending or pending review, now it's ready to process. What that means the system was able to deal with any differences, and it knows what to do with those differences. Because those differences fall within the tolerance, system knows how to deal with this $5 and $1 differences. So for me, there is nothing to do here. It's ready to process. I can, of course, process it manually by clicking on submit for approval, or there is another job that you can execute that say process reviewed matches and reconciliation. The name is terrible, to be honest. I don't know what it means, but it basically say if the carrier invoice is ready to process it. And when you process it, it will generate a vendor invoice journal, right? Right now it's ready to process, but there is no vendor invoice journal. You see that button right here, vendor invoice journal, is grayed out because there is no invoice journal for it yet. So what we'll do is say, if the invoice is ready to process it. And I will run this job to do that for me. So I'm going to click on OK and run that. And that's when the system say, all right, do I have any carrier invoices that are ready to go? If I do, just like, let them. So now I will refresh that screen. All right, so now you see it kind of disappeared. It's a bit kind of halfway, but let me open this. Vendor invoice, vendor carrier invoices right here. You see that grid is blank. Why? Because it only shows us the opened or unapproved, unprocessed invoices. But I can say, listen, show me all the invoices. So uncheck this checkbox. Here's my last invoice. How would I know that? It says $150. Yeah, 105.51. And now, because it has been processed automatically, I can click on vendor invoice journal button, and here's my journal. Same way as it was for the line for the PO, right? It's basically, it's right here. It's a bit simpler. $156 is what the vendor will get paid, 105 for the freight, and 51 for accessorial. Right, so that basically completes a flow for the transfer order. And I have one more interesting thing for you to show, and then I'll kind of stop and kind of let you maybe ask any questions before we pass it on to the next speaker. What I would like to do here is to show you, oh, Oleksiy, you're doing it one order by one order, but is it possible for me to create a load with multiple orders? And is it possible for me to do that automatically so the system suggests to do that for me, not me doing that manually one after another? That can be annoying. So the answer is yes, right? But you would need to create some configurations before that can happen. What I have here, guys, is I have created some orders that I'll show you, because for the sales orders, I decided it's going to make sense. It doesn't add any value for me to do it manually or in front of you. So I have these 3 sales orders on the bottom. Just remember the numbers: 360, 361, and 362. Let me show you the first order. The first order is, once it opens, let's take a look at delivery tab. Oh, it is to be delivered on 10/10, or sorry, it is to be shipped on 10/10. Oh yeah, my bad, I'm blind. So this order needs to be shipped on 10/10, October 10. And the second line on that PO, same thing, 10/10, great. The second order is to be shipped on 10/11, so October 11. Let me show you that, delivery, October 11. And if you guessed it, this third order will be on October 12. So October 10, 11, and 12. This is when we want to ship these orders. Now, I want to generate a load for all of those 3 orders. Well, how do I do that? Well, we go to transportation management. We kind of know that. Now, I could have done, remember, load planning is where I go to manually generate these loads, right? I go here, I say, listen, ship date will be on October 12th. Show me all the sales order lines. You know, here's my sales order lines right here. I can add them, you know, because what about 11/1? Okay, I see another one, 11. And then on the 10, I see another one, right? So it's quite manual, and I can add these lines to load one by one. So that's a load planning way, manual way. I don't want to do that. And if I don't, I'll use load building workbench. Another workbench, I think that's the last one. So load building workbench will build loads for me automatically, right? Again, naming could have been better, but I mean, that's the way it is. Again, load building workbench can be used. So first we will need to select a load template. This will just define my kind of how my loads will be built and any parameters related to it, like what is the maximum weight, etc. So this is kind of very generic setup, let's say full load. And now I need to decide on a route. Basically, there is a list of predefined scheduled routes. Sometimes they're called milk runs, for example. I know that this carrier comes to my warehouse and goes to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different addresses every Tuesday, for example. And this is what the scheduled route is. Remember, before, the routes were created by us when we assigned a carrier to a load. It was a manual route creation. But in this case, I have a list of predefined milk runs, so to speak, right? And I'll select the one that is to depart on, accidentally, on October 12, 2021. That's a Tuesday every week milk run route. I created this route in advance. It basically say every Tuesday, on, in this case, October 12, I have a carrier going somewhere. Right? I mean, somewhere I can definitely answer the question, where exactly is it going, but let's take a look at this later on a bit. So I selected that route, and now I would like to let system to say, are there any orders that qualify? And you can see shipping date from October 12 to October 12, right? That means only on that date. But what if I want to include some orders that are to be shipped a bit earlier than October 12? Well, let's do it from October 10 to October 12. I basically say, look at any sales orders that have a ship date between October 10 and October 12, and that have a shipping address that matches to one of the addresses in my scheduled route, right? So how do I know which addresses fall under that scheduled route? Well, I have the route plan right here. Here's my sequence of steps from warehouse 61 to customer address 003. Then from 03 to 04, and then from customer 04 to 019. These are all controlled by something that are called hubs, right? So I have this own WMS hub. Click on it, it has an address. Okay, once I click on it, click on address, it has an address in Redmond, Washington, which matches to my warehouse 61 address. Then the destination hub says Los Angeles. I know that this address matches to address of what? A customer 003. Then the second segment goes from Los Angeles hub to Georgia 1 hub. And this Georgia 1 hub has an address that I know matches to the address of the customer 004. And then the third segment goes from that customer 04 address to Georgia 2 hub. Click on that, and I know this address matches to my customer 019 address, right? So this is a sequence, this is a milk run that you have set up. And then of course you create the schedules, right? So you basically say, now generate a schedule for me. In this case, I have generated it already every Tuesday, interval once a week. That's why I was able to select this route right here. Right, so here it is at, what is it, 176. Here's that route that I auto-generated based on that plan. 176 departs on October 12th. And if you look right here, here it is, it's 176 as well. So now I selected the route, so the system knows which addresses qualify. I then modified the shipping dates. I basically said everything that ships from October 10 to 12, show me what you can propose for me. And then you click on propose loads. You basically say, now you search through the list of all those open sales orders and tell me what I can add to my load. And here it is. Here's a suggestion. It says, I'm proposing you to create that load. Here's the total capacity. Here's the consolidated capacity or consolidated weight. And here are proposed load lines. All 4 lines. Remember this order number 39, order number 360. So the first 2 lines are for the first order. The third line is for the second order, 361. And the last line is for the order number 3. It basically say all of these orders qualify, right? One thing I'll say is, if I cancel out of it and you forgot to change the date and you kept it 12. In this case, I'm limiting the date range. I say only the orders that fall in on October 12th. When you do the proposal in this case, I think it's going to recommend just one single line because we have only one single sales order that falls on that October 12th date, right? Here it is. It's on order number 362. So if you don't see all the orders that you expect, just make sure that there is a correct shipping date from and shipping date to. Shipping date to you cannot change because it's driven by the scheduled route, but the shipping date from, it's really up to you to say, oh, that order is ready to ship on 10th, but let's wait 2 days and ship it on October 12th instead. Click on propose loads. So that's when the system will go and generate these proposal for us. It's not a load yet, it's just a proposed load. Are there any lines that are not included? There are none in this case. Why? It's because the system could fit everything it wanted to in a single load, but if our template was defining some restrictions on the volume or on the weight, and there are lines that qualify but take that trailer over the limit, it will say that those are not included in that load. And once I'm happy, click on create load. That's basically a different way to create a load. In this case, it's generated by the system for us, right? So let's just show us this load right here. That's the load that it created, 341. We can see 3 orders in it, order 360, 361, 362. It automatically generated a route for us. Why? Because that's our scheduled route. That's a route that we already created. And now we have a route rate details. We have a $550 rate that was defined for it. And of course, you may ask me, Oleksiy, where that 550 came from? Well, let's go back to my route plan. That's the one that we use, remember? And for each segment in that route plan, I can define spot rates. So remember, the total is what, 550? So let's take a look at the spot rate for this segment number 1. It is $100. All right, so I know that to take it from warehouse 61 to customer address 003, it's $100. The second segment is $200, so 1 plus 2, $300 total. And the third segment, spot rate, 250, so that's 300 plus 250 gives us 550, and that's a rate that the system calculated for us. And from that point on, we have a load that the system generated for us, and it's really up to us to take it through the same sequence of steps as we have done before on the routes. So that's kind of 3 different ways to generate a load. A, manually, the way we did it for purchase orders. B, system automatically, when you create a transfer order, it generated that load for us automatically. and C, consolidated based on the route plan when the system proposes as the orders that can be included on a single load. And in this case, we have a load with 3 different sales orders. So I know, guys, it has been pretty quick. I just wanted to show you those things because I think that they are kind of maybe interesting to you. And with that being said, I think I'll conclude my presentation. Let me just go back here. Let me stop presenting. And